everyone, I am completing this final assignment on the company Restoration Hardware. Now I wanted to start with an overview of what you can expect from this presentation. I will start with introducing the company and giving details about the company itself and its consumers. Then I will start to dive into Restoration Hardware's financial statements, beginning with the balance sheet. I will break down, analyze the balance sheet, income statement, and overall stock information. Taking that information from those slides, I will compare the financial ratios for some of the main sections in Restoration Hardware's financial statements to help determine the strength of the company. Before ending, I want to leave you with some history and interesting information about this company that I found enjoyable. Finally, I will conclude with my take on Restoration Hardware's financials and how, after analyzing the statements, that we, as consumers and possible investors, can infer about the company's well-being and operations. Also, please keep in mind that all numerical information presented in these slides are presented in thousands. Restoration Hardware identifies as a luxury home furnishing purveyor. They offer a wide variety of styles and designs for all rooms of your home, including outdoor areas. Restoration Hardware prices are rather high. Their targeted consumer group for this store chain makes an annual salary of about $250,000 a year. Restoration Hardware emphasizes the artistry of their products, though. They introduce each showroom and design by the designer. They showcase the pieces and the designers on their website to browse and read when shopping. This gives their merchandise a more prestigious and classy feel. Competitors for Restoration Hardware include, but are not limited to, Ethan Allen, Pottery Barn, and Z Gallery. Each of these brands can be identified as a high-class furniture establishment. In an attempt to stress exclusivity, Restoration Hardware offers memberships for their frequent shoppers. These memberships offer discounted prices on furniture and other merchandise. For example, Restoration Hardware's Automo Torchère floor lamp, that you can see a picture of in the lower right-hand corner, was originally priced at $3,355. With the membership, the price drops down to $2,516, making it maybe a little bit more appealing for a frequent Restoration Hardware shopper. We're going to start off with Restoration Hardware's balance sheet. The assets section of Restoration Hardware's balance sheet increased by $241,619 between the years of 2020 and 2021. The biggest contributions to Restoration Hardware's assets section are merchandise inventories, property and management, and operating lease right-of-use assets. These three make up for 71% of Restoration Hardware's total assets. The liability section of the balance sheet also increased, but only by $24,244. The fact that the assets for this company increased at a greater amount than the company's liabilities is evidence that the company is financially stable and is growing in a positive direction. If Restoration Hardware's liabilities were higher than the assets, then the company would most likely not have enough money available to pay its debts and would ultimately be in financial trouble. Also found on the balance sheet is Restoration Hardware's stockholder equity. We can see that from the year of 2020 to January of 2021, this section of Restoration Hardware's balance sheet had increased from $18,651 to $447,026. Now, an increase like this in stockholder equity draws attention from investors. They want to invest in this company more because Restoration Hardware is doing well and it's growing exponentially. Now, stockholder equity is based on the success of the company, but the success of the company can be based on the sales. Sales are found on our next financial statement, the income statement. Sales are also commonly referred to as revenue. In total, Restoration Hardware had an increase in net revenue from $2,647,437 in 2020 to $2,848,626 in January of 2021. With an increase in sales, it is in deal that a company also has an increase in gross profit. Restoration Hardware's gross profit also increased from 2020 to 2021 from $1,095,011 to $1,325,531. Also found on the income statement is cost of goods sold. Cost of goods sold is the amount of money it costs a company to produce and sell its inventory. Restoration Hardware actually had a decrease in cost of goods sold with $29,331. This allows for the company to spend less and ultimately pocket more money than if the cost of goods sold were increasing. The expenses section of an income statement include any and all expenses like sales, general, and administrative expenses. For Restoration Hardware, this is the largest portion of the expenses section, and recently this section increased by $126,493. Now, after taking all expenses and taxes out of the net revenue, we are left with net income. The hope is that your expenses and costs are going to be low, so when you sell your inventory and you subtract those expenses, your overall income will be high. For Restoration Hardware, they increased their income by $51,440 from the year of 2020 to January 30th of 2021. Now, the easiest way to gauge how a company is doing is to view their cash flows of operations. This section of the statement of cash flows covers a wide range of expenses, taxes, and categories of money earned by the company. From the year of 2020 to January 30, 2021, the overall increase of cash flows from operating expenses was $161,582. Since Restoration Hardware experienced an increase in operations of cash flows, I can infer they did not have a hard time selling their products during that time frame. January 2021, the net cash flows for operating activities was $500,770. Cash flows from investing and financing focuses on Restoration Hardware's investments in other companies and purchases of property and equipment. I can see that with the increases in the investing and financing categories of the statement of cash flow, Restoration Hardware has used more money each year for investing and financing. Although these are examples of money being used, the statement of cash flow does also emphasize on increases in cash flow for the company too. The overall net cash provided by cash flows from operating activities increased from $339,188 in 2020 to that $500,770 January 2021. Now, when looking at the stocks for Restoration Hardware, the price is currently at $475,036. That is an increase of $266.61 from 2020. This is an aggressive increase from the stock price of 2016, which was only $61.62. This means that over the last 5 years, Restoration Hardware's stock increased almost 8 times as much as it did in 2016. Increases in stock price show company strength and gives opportunity for the company's shareholders to make and save some money too. I constructed a graph to give a visual representation of how the stock prices increased over the last 5 years. Overall, there's a strong increase in stock price, with a very small dip in price in 2017. And from there, we do see exponential growth, most of which between the years of 2020 and 2021. Now, Restoration Hardware does not pay dividends to its shareholders. Typically, companies pay dividends so their shareholders can get some return on their investments. Paying dividends does show financial strength. Despite Restoration Hardware's increase in revenue and overall company growth, they do not pay dividends, and they have stated that they do not intend to start paying them in the future. Most companies like Restoration Hardware who don't pay dividends typically put that money towards making the company more valuable. Earnings per share, also known as EPS, can be found by subtracting the number of outstanding shares by the net income of preferred stock dividend. The EPS for Restoration Hardware for January of 2021 is 19,668,976. The higher the company's EPS, the more profitable the company is. I put together some ratios to help us gauge the strength of Restoration Hardware. First, using some liquidity ratios, I wanted us to look at the current ratio. That involves current assets and liabilities. Now, a company that has a current ratio above 1 can be assumed to have positive working capital. Current ratio for Restoration Hardware is 1.18. Now, the quick ratio is similar to the current ratio, but instead it uses quick assets like cash, accounts receivable, and marketable securities. This is a more precise way to calculate the strength of the company. Restoration Hardware has a quick ratio of 0.29. The third type of ratio we are looking at is a solvency analysis tool known as liabilities to equity ratio. This ratio helps us determine how reliant Restoration Hardware is on creditor financing compared to equity financing. A higher ratio indicates higher solvency and therefore higher risk. Now, this is a very high liabilities to equity ratio for Restoration Hardware, 5.48. And investors might see that as risky. The next type of ratios for us to look at fall under profitability. The first ratio is the gross profit margin. This uses cost of goods sold and products. Typically, we want to see a higher gross profit margin and continuing to increase. In 2018, the median gross profit for S&P 500 companies was 43.4%. Restoration Hardware's gross profit margin landed at 46.53%. We can infer that Restoration Hardware did a good job managing its cost of sales. The second ratio is the operating expense margin. The Restoration Hardware operating expense margin is extremely low, 0.30. The average operating expense margin in 2018 for S&P 500 companies was 16.3%. Although it was a few years prior, I think it does put it into perspective just how low the operating expense margin for Restoration Hardware is. Restoration Hardware has a bit of a lower return on asset, which can imply that they are not making enough. Third ratio on this slide is return on equity ratio. This measures the return from the perspective of the company stockholders. In 2018, the average S&P 500 company had a return on asset ratio between 13.5% and 15.6%. Restoration Hardware has a bit of a lower return on asset, which again, it implies that they are not making enough income based on the use of their assets. The last profitability ratio is return on assets ratio. This tool helps measure return from the perspective of the entire company. With the return on assets 9.38%, we can assume that Restoration Hardware must be managing their assets and are profitable. The return on assets ratio, using data from 2020, was 9.01%. This proves that the company is managing assets and gaining more profit than the previous year. Now we can turn over to turnover ratios. And when we look at accounts receivable turnover, we can see about how many times a company can turn its accounts receivable into cash. For Restoration Hardware, it's about 52.5 times a period. This could mean they are strict about collecting debt from their customers. Accounts payable turnover shows how many times a company pays off its accounts payable during a period. Restoration Hardware has a pretty low account payable turnover at 3.09, which means they aren't paying their account payable as much during a period. And this can lead to us thinking that they're running out of money, or they're just dragging out their payments, which neither are ideal. Inventory turnover shows how many times the company sells its inventory in a period. Restoration Hardware inventory turnover is 2.07. This is actually a decrease from previous year. Inventory turnover for 2021 at 3.5. This means that Restoration Hardware did not sell its inventory as many times in 2021 as they did in 2020, which is surprising given the COVID pandemic. Now, Restoration Hardware started with a man who was in the process of restoring an older Victorian home. The gentleman found it incredibly difficult to find affordable yet high-end furnishing. He struggled with money and decided to make a living selling hardware from his porch. Fast forward 42 years, and this extremely successful company has flourished. Restoration Hardware is solely an American store. It's difficult to even buy Restoration Hardware products without using a U.S. address. The decision to go international in 2021 for the first time is an exciting announcement. The board of directors have not released where, but there will be a gallery opening in England within a year. As of right now, there are 7 restoration locations that also include luxurious restaurants and rooftop bars. They are expecting to open a location in Ohio that will include a restaurant, as well as adding the restaurant and bar to several other already operating locations. The Restoration Hardware retail store closest to us, in case anybody wants to check it out, is located inside the King of Prussia Mall. And no, unfortunately, that location does not include a rooftop bar or a restaurant, but it could inspire someone to update their home interior design. Overall, based on the financial statements Restoration Hardware has provided for the last 2 years, I can infer that the company is financially stable and also growing and continuing to increase in assets and income. The company has some concerning ratios that may lead us to think they aren't profiting as much as they might be spending. Restoration Hardware is opening more stores and launching more designs and showrooms, still even after the COVID-19 pandemic has crippled our economy and a lot of businesses. This could be a potential reason why they're spending more and maybe profiting less. Restoration Hardware had closed down their retail stores for a short while during the height of the pandemic, but saw an increase in business trends during the second of 4 fiscal quarters in 2020. This was possible because Restoration Hardware recognized the needs of the company and the economic environment and emphasized on online sales. Leadership thought processes like this help mold successful businesses. Based on the financial statements we dove into and the financials described, I can attest that Restoration Hardware is a pretty strong company, and it's continuing to expand. Restoration Hardware has increases in assets and revenue and decreases in cost of goods sold. They have decent liquidity and a pretty good profit margin. The company is making more money than it is spending, as we can assume from the larger increase in assets over liabilities. Restoration Hardware stock prices are still rising, meaning investors will be drawn to this company and its continuously increasing stock price. If I were to purchase stock, the ideal time would have been in 2016 when it was only $61. I do believe that the company will continue to grow and the stock price will continue to rise, but I don't know if they will hit another increase quite as large as the increase that they had in 2020 to 2021. If I was a bank, I would probably loan Restoration Hardware money. The average payable outstanding days is about 118 days. I know that within 118 days or so, I would be paid back on the money that I loaned them. Of course, shorter amount of time is better, but I think 118 days is not out of the question when in regards to large loans. I enjoyed focusing on this company through the duration of this course. I am a new homeowner and I found pleasure in some interior design and was inspired by a lot of the things that Restoration Hardware sells. Seeing how a company like this functions from the other side instead of a consumer side was interesting and enlightening. And I'm glad to have had the opportunity to learn through Restoration Hardware.